Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm your host, Steve Henning, and no matter the time of day or where you're joining us from, as always, we thank you for being here. Today, I'm actually joined by two really insightful gentlemen that I'm excited about. They're both from Escalent. First, Mike Eaves, who's the Insights Manager for the Automotive and Mobility team, and Lucas Lowden, who is the Insight Consultant within the Fleet Practice and also the Program Lead for the Fleet Advisory Hub. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
You bet. So let's just jump right in. And I think the best place to start maybe is we set the stage a little bit as we talk about the market, where it is today, and so forth. And specifically, we're going to talk a bit about Class 2B and 3 vehicles and how they're being used. So maybe you can help set that stage for us a bit with just what are Class 2B and 3 vehicles?
Yeah, Class 2B and 3, basically we start at 8,500 pounds GVW and go up through 10,000 with 2B, and then from 10,000 to 14,000 pounds with Class 3. And there is considerable overlap of product types within the segment. So a lot of these vehicles are used for commercial, which is our main focus today. But also we have to recognize that within a large portion of the industry, and that's the pickup segment, a large proportion of those are used for personal use. And some are also used for joint personal and commercial use. So you can think of a contractor that's driving a pickup and maybe he tows a trailer behind it to accommodate his tools, or he has a pickup box on the back. But then he takes those off and uses it as a private vehicle, maybe to tow a boat or RV or something like that. So there is an element of a cross-pollination between personal and commercial use. So if you look at the segment in total, it's a very large volume. Mm-hmm. And pickups are the largest portion of that. And as I explained, personal use is a large portion of that total. But we're talking about the 2500s and the 3500s, 250, 350 category of trucks is when we're talking about 2B and 3. So when we're talking about pickups, that's the type of vehicle we're talking about. We're not including the F-150s and the comparable products from GM and Ram that are mainly personal use type vehicles. So we're not including those. So just to get that straight. So we have a lot of pickups in the segment, and a large proportion of those are personal use. But of course, if you look at fleets across the country, many fleets are using these vehicles as service vehicles to support whatever business they are in. Mm-hmm. In addition to pickups, we have chassis cab versions. So these are basically a pickup without the box on the back. And they may come in a couple of wheelbases, or we tend to talk about cab to axle, maybe 60 or 84 inch. And those are upfitted with bodies. So typically they would have perhaps a service body. That would be the highest volume segment. Mm-hmm. So we see a lot of those service bodies used in smaller vehicles, but also you think of the utility industry, large fleets also using this type of vehicle. So very predominant. We also have some flatbeds, some wreckers, some box vans, but not too many box vans, because we'll talk about vans in a minute. But so there's a diverse range of bodies that can go onto a chassis cab, but they're limited in really the length of the vehicle you can do. So when you talk about box vans, typically you would think more of a class 4 vehicle going into box vans.
Right. So
I'm going to talk about vans now. Vans are a very important segment. And if we look at what's happened in the van segment since COVID, mm-hmm. that segment has really exploded. I mean, we all know the reasons why. We all, sat at home during COVID. We expected deliveries to our door, and they arrived. And so even now, the vehicle industry is probably still short of vans. If there's one segment that's still short, it's probably the van segment. So we're seeing very little discounting on the used vehicles still commanding a significant premium in the van business, very different to some other segments.
Right.
So the van market's exploded. And we expect that to continue. we think the van market will continue to be a very strong competitor going forward. Most of the vans are in Class 2, but some go into Class 3. Now, there's a very big distinction when you get into between 2 and 3, and that is 10,000 pounds GVW. Over 10,000 pounds GVW, the vehicle can be, and usually is, termed a commercial vehicle, unless it's used for personal use. When you get to commercial vehicle status, you see a DOT number on the side of the vehicle. That makes a big difference. So what does that mean? Well, as a user, I'm more liable to have my drivers certified. They need a medical certificate. Cross-state border traffic is, I need a DOT certificate to do that. And so users will try wherever they can to get below 10,000 pounds. So we see that in the pickup space, even though it may be a vehicle that starts with a GVW over 10,000 pounds, there is an option to get that just below 10,000 pounds, maybe 9,900 pounds or somewhere around there. So that, yes, I'm sacrificing GVW, which means payload to me, but then I don't have the headaches of what the DOT could really imply on my business. So that's a big distinction between 2B and 3, and it's why we have a differentiation. So going back to the vans, most of the vans we see are below 10,000 pounds, and quite often they're well below 10,000 pounds. So we think of the Ford Transit, that's the lead vehicle, and think of the Ram ProMaster, and both have been extremely successful in penetrating the market. GM is another competitor in that market, and unlike Ford and Ram, it's continued to market its pretty old design vehicle that dates back to the 1990s with the Savannah and Express models. They're kind of outdated, but they do have appeal to some people. One of the big advantages is that they do have V8 powertrains, whereas the others have come down to like 6-cylinder engines. And that gives you an advantage in towing. And some users in this commercial space like to tow a trailer with quite heavy equipment. If you think about plumbing and some of the other utilities, quite a lot of heavy equipment is towed around. Can keep it safely in a locked compartment in a trailer. And so to some users, that's important. But the Savannah and Express do not have quite the cargo capacity in terms of volume that their principal competitors have. Mercedes has also entered this space with the Sprinter. They've been in business in the US and brought the European style van to the US just after 2000. So they've been in the market a long time with the Sprinter, and it does well. It does have the Mercedes nameplate, which is a draw to some people. But on the other hand, the distribution is not as good as some of its competitors. So it does have some significant fleet business. It picked up a lot of Amazon business in the past, and you still see those on the road. But in terms of going after the plumbers and the electricians, they've not been quite so successful, partly because their distribution is not as strong as Ford and Ram and perhaps GM. So that's talking about the van business. Another important part of Class 2B and 3 is the cutaway segment.
Right.
The cutaways are based on, again, old vehicles, and they come from GM. It's based on the Sierra and Express. And from Ford, it's the E350 and 450. Ford is over 10,000 pounds only, and GM comes in just below 10,000 pounds with a single rear wheel variant. It has been quite successful. When you get into, so most of the volume is now in Class 3 because Ford is the lead competitor versus GM, and they've moved to 12,000 and up to 14,500 pound GVW. So actually escapes into Class 4, but it's a sizable segment that's remained really with old-fashioned type product. They're all gas engine, so there's no electrification into this segment. So it's very traditional, but what they do offer is low cost, and they do offer the ability to upfit into certain types of vehicles. So we see upfits on cutaways, pretty well restricted. Van bodies are probably the lead, and we see a lot of cargo boxes. And you think of the rental companies, which are a huge user of these type of vehicles. You think of U-Haul, and they offer cutaways from probably a 10-foot body, even up to approaching 20 feet in length on a cutaway. So it's a very, very familiar product, and it's ideal for rental and leasing operations. Low cost, familiar, easy to work on, and they've been around forever. And all of the major body companies, have outfits on this type of vehicle. So it's an established vehicle type, principally with van bodies, although we see also a lot of service bodies, which are like a dual purpose. It's probably an evolving trend, but service body with a van, so you can use it as a workspace with room to stand up, which is an important differentiator.
Sure.
In the service industry. Finally, talk about bus as a sub-segment. Most of these are based on cutaways, although there is, of course, bus variants of vans. And it's a stable segment. Probably there will be some growth. We can think of shuttle buses as a major thing in here. When we get to the heavier end of class 3 into 4, we think of school buses, the smaller school buses that are built on cutaway chassis. Obviously, they have to be robust and reliable. School bus regulations are quite severe.
Right.
So they're purpose-built to be school buses, and they have certainly a big place in the school bus industry. Also used as shuttle buses, hotel buses, church groups and other groups will use these buses, often based off vans rather than cutaway chassis. So the van business does include the cargo van and the passenger carrying versions.
Okay. That's good education, I think, for everybody. And interestingly enough, maybe ironically, as you were wrapping up there, I literally just saw a van in my neighborhood drive by out the window. It was a plumber, in fact. So they're absolutely used, as you're saying. So maybe if you could just touch on a little bit. I know you did an analysis leveraging some data from Convoy, comparing shopping behavior and sales, and you touched on a little bit of that, but anything you can dive into there and share a bit more about that analysis?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to pause here a minute and just clear
Okay.
some.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've done our analysis, and our recent blog focused on the analysis we did with WTS data and Convoy. And that gives us, especially in class 2B and 3, because of the very broad category of vehicles that are in that segment, as well as the data that we collect. It's or the WTS collects. It's a huge amount of data that enables us to look at the trends in the marketplace. So we have a little bit of history here that we can look back and record what's happening. So, just going back to the van space, we can see in the van space that lead generation is extremely high in the van space, continues to be. And this implies that there's still a shortage of vehicles because of the amount of leads. I need a van. I'm going to look everywhere I can to get that van to fill my needs.
Right.
So it's been a great asset to add to our production database. So our production database forecasts each individual model going out through, we actually go out through 2035. We break it down by powertrain and drive type. We break it by OEM, by model. So it's a pretty extensive database, but the WTS data with the body information and the user information, we can analyze that down to more in terms of vocational type and the actual body that's going to be installed on the truck. So we can look at trends that happen in the industry using the WTS Convoy data.
Okay. Probably won't dive any further into the, I guess, the variation of products and so forth. You touched on much of that as you were defining the class 2B and 3. So maybe turn our attention a little more toward where the market's headed, what the trends are, and so forth. So thinking about those brands specifically, what do you think they need to know? What do they need to focus on in terms of the future and where the market's going? Where should they put their resources and their time?
A diverse subject there, looking at future trends,
Yes.
because we need to include what's happening. Obviously, top of mind to everyone is, regulations about emissions, and
Right.
it's a huge impact on all the commercial vehicle industry. We've got to understand that. So, I mean, we'll talk about electrification maybe first.
Okay.
Or maybe we'll step back and talk about what the industry is right now. So if we talk about 2B and 3, the majority of the industry is gasoline powered, by far and away the majority. So we have seen diesel come in to a degree in vans, but Ford and Ram have both dropped theirs, and so, as has GM. So they are clearly focused on gasoline, at least in the short term. In terms of pickups, we do see a lot of diesel engines, but these are often needed for towing heavy applications. So especially when you get into especially when you get into class 3, we're talking about towing some pretty heavy things. So you can think about RVs and boats and motorhomes and so on. Some of these are really heavy, and so you need a good reliable powertrain, and diesel engines fit that bill. I mean, we have diesel engines with up to 1,000 pound-feet of torque that apply to towing extremely well. So in pickups, we do see diesel engines. Cutaways, 100% gas. Chassis cabs, a mixture, but gas is pretty important. So gasoline has a really established place in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about electrification, and what immediately springs to mind is that some of these applications are very hard to electrify because we have, if we think about a chassis cab in class 2B and 3, it's a very short vehicle overall. A lot of these in class 2B and 3 in the pickup space and chassis cab, we need 4-wheel drive, which further complicates where do you put batteries on this type of vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very complicated outfit in terms of a very short vehicle to put a decent amount of batteries to give you the range. So it's difficult. In the van space, we do have entries. Transit came in first. We have Rivian that's supplying Amazon, and we have Ram that's joined with the ePromaster. GM doesn't have an entry. Mercedes has the Sprinter. So we have these entrants coming in. So let's look back what happened with these vehicles. The Transit came in 2022, but in terms of volume, and they had a very limited range. I mean, it was quoted at 126 miles, but that's really perfection. Okay, I mean, can you really get 126 miles? And would you ever, try and get to 126 miles?
Sure.
Probably not. So, yeah, some customers jumped in, and I think there was a realization that these aren't going to work in my application. It's okay if you have a very, very dedicated route where I go out in the morning, I come back at night, and I can charge the vehicle. But a lot of these are used by private contractors. I drive home, I park it in the driveway. It won't go in the garage.
Right.
Okay. So what am I going to do? I'm going to trail a big long lead out to it? Probably not. So there's challenges in doing this in terms of where you refuel or recharge the vehicle. The other thing is batteries add weight.
Right.
So whereas you had an entry-level van at 8,500 pounds with a Transit or an ProMaster, now you're talking about 9,350 or 9,500 pounds GVW, and you still are suffering with payload degradation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an issue too. So the initial entry from Transit wasn't too successful. Amazon is probably an ideal application when you think about it. So we see the Rivian vans on the road. Right. They're running around their neighborhoods. They seem to be working quite well, but they go back to the depot, very limited mileage and very predictable routes. That doesn't occur for the plumber and the electrician. He may be here one day, somewhere else the next.
That's right.
So that's more difficult. As we go forward, we have to think about what's going to happen. Well, E-Transit has increased the range to something like 149 miles now with the latest 2024 model that's just been introduced. Similar range for ePromaster. Is that sufficient? We don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I suspect it's still a bit low for a lot of people. Range anxiety is going to continue. We haven't talked about GM because on the Savannah Express, they continue with gasoline powertrains. But GM did introduce the Bright Drop range, which is now being rebranded Chevrolet. It's a vehicle that's designed really, it's head on for the package delivery company. It's probably not an ideal van for a plumber or an electrician. It has very limited payload capability, but it has good range. It has range, I think, up to 270 miles, which is great. You know, so it has the range, but it doesn't have the payload. And it doesn't have all the configurations that maybe you would want to outfit that van for a typically like a plumber or an electrician or a service trade. So that limits its application. It's also incredibly expensive compared with some of the others. And yes, there are maybe rebates and incentives to reduce that, but it's going to be a hard sell, I think, to get into the volume play of the van market with the Bright Drop. In the other vehicle spaces, there hasn't been electrification. So we don't have an electric pickup. We don't have an electric chassis cab. We don't have an electric cutaway. Well, there are some electric bus conversions, and these are conversions, you know, on the Ford, principally on the Ford 450. There are aftermarket conversions. They tend to be expensive, and it's probably not, maybe not the desired way to go to market long term. You would want an OEM to take full responsibility for the vehicle. But they do fulfill a need where an electrified school bus is required in Class 4 or Class 3. But the mainstream products from Ford and GM, there are no electric vehicle variants.
Well, a couple of I guess thoughts, and you touched on these. You know, use case certainly is a factor as a business in particular is starting to look at, okay, what route do I go? Does electrification make sense, et cetera? Use case clearly, and the OEMs are obviously recognizing that as well based on the products and so forth. So as we go a little further, dig a little deeper, I guess my next question would be, it is so complex. How does somebody stay current? How do they understand what some of the challenges are and what they should be looking at, even where to start? You know, what would your advice be right now?
It is a complex industry. It's far more complex than personal use type vehicles because
Absolutely.
In a lot of cases, you go to an outfitter to have either a body installed or a conversion, and that is far different to what happens in the personal use space. So you need the integration of the OEM with the outfitter. And we've seen in the outfitter industry, and I think we'll see a lot more, a certain degree of reduction in the number of players. We're seeing consolidation in the industry of the outfitter. They're getting far more professional. So some of the outfits now are very sophisticated. And what that brings to the end user, and we have to always think about the end user, is productivity. So if I'm a customer, I see any of these vehicles, they're a tool to me to do my job.
That's right.
In some places, they're a necessary tool to do the job. So I want a vehicle that works for me in terms of what I can do in the vehicle. So, you know, to go back to the van space, what we saw with, you know, when Sprinter came in and Transit followed and ePromaster, they provided vans in which you could work. So that's an important addition to what happens in the industry in terms of productivity. I don't have to take this out and work on it outside. I might have my tools in the truck. I can work on it inside the truck. And the outfitters have responded to that. So you look around and see the outfits that are now available for the van industry, very sophisticated racking systems, all adding to productivity. So where do you start? Where does a customer go? If you're an individual, it's perhaps mind-boggling where you go, but you start with a good commercial vehicle dealer, and you think about the commercial vehicle dealers that are now in place. And I have to point to Ford. Ford has been the lead in this area of the market. I won't say forever, but for certainly a very long time. And with their Ford Pro, they are committed to commercials. I mean, they put the boat out there first. Others are scrambling to follow, but Ford has a significant lead with their dedicated commercial vehicle dealers. I mean, they also sell personal use, but they have a bent to be good in commercial vehicles.
Yes, they do.
So they're people that are they're people that really understand what's required. They have the contacts with the upfitting industry to bring this whole together. So really, the dealer is the commercial vehicle dealer is the one that's going to be your go-to person, you know, to get the type of vehicle that's going to work for you and get the outfit that's right for you. So I see that as very important in the commercial vehicle industry. This level of expertise that is required to get you the right type of vehicle.
Definitely agree with that.
I think, you know, to kind of extend on that, it's hard to always be chasing, right? And, you know, how do those manufacturers, the dealers, the upfitters, how do they all get ahead and stay ahead, ensuring that they remain competitive? And, you know, we from some of the insights that we gathered, you know, we came up with some recommendations. And, you know, one of the first is really get to know the landscape and stay tuned in, identifying trends in competitive set, what vehicles, products, and specifications are out there, configurations. And really, this gets extra emphasis today with the proliferation of startup manufacturers and service providers coming and going, with business models adapting and going to market plans evolving. It really is a little bit of the Wild West for what's really been a traditional sector over the years. So, you know, this change, it has led and will continue to lead to plenty of merger and acquisition activity. But we also see a lot of cases of strange bedfellows, so to say, participating in what I think of as like co-opetition, a cooperative competition, you know, to ensure that the fleet business, the end customer, that their needs are being met.
Yeah.
So that's one big part of that picture of staying in tune. The next is focusing and following the changing regulatory landscape, where, you know, it's a bit of alphabet soup, right? You got EPA, CARB, ACF, ACT. What does all this mean? And as you dig into that, there's a lot of legalese language that needs to be sifted through, but it's not feasible to ignore it given where things are going in the environment today. So it really is critical to, you know, ensure compliance among both the fleet businesses and the manufacturers and service providers, but also as we're thinking about new products and services that are going to be designed and brought to the market to achieve some of those regulatory constraints. And, you know, lastly, you know, Mike touched on this a little bit. We need to understand that these aren't just vehicles to these fleet businesses. You know, these commercial vehicles, they really are truly tools of the trade, often crucial to the livelihood of the people in these businesses, especially those smaller businesses that do make up the bulk of the market. So, you know, tuning into that customer journey, having a clear picture of vehicle use cases, needs, and pain points, it really does go a long way in connecting the dots between the businesses operating the vehicles and manufacturers and service providers to kind of meet one another in the middle with the right products and services at the right time in the right place.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. To expound on that just a little bit, so, you know, big business, small business, medium size, I guess, I think it's applicable to all. If someone has a desire to get a little more involved in, hey, I want to help chart some of this, where we're headed, etc., what would your advice be, Lucas?
So, you know, as you know, Steve, Escalent, Work Truck Solutions, and Convoy, we've been partnered for several years now. And we've frequently discussed, and we all agree on the importance of collaboration among stakeholders across the sector, right? And so that's where, as a research and analytics company, an advisory company, we dug into our research toolbox and we identified really a tailor-made solution for this comprehensive engagement across the ecosystem. And we call it Fleet Advisory Hub Community, where it's a virtual place where fleet professionals, manufacturers, suppliers, service providers, upfitters, et cetera, all across the ecosystem can join us to participate in research activities where they can share their views to make opinions and perspectives heard. And, we often hear from those folks that do participate in these kind of programs that it's both engaging, but they also learn and they get information.
Yeah.
They understand more of what are the trends, what's going on out there, both from the voice of the end customer, but also, some of that cooperative kind of, insight of what's going on out there, what's everybody doing. We're not out here sharing trade secrets or nothing like that. So,
well, it sounds like it's a two-way street, right? There's benefits on both sides of that coin, so to speak, and that's a great thing. So, beyond feeling like my head is really full right now from all the information you guys shared, I see it maybe two pretty good takeaways. First of all, use your commercial dealer as a resource. If you're a business, again, big, small, in between, whatever size, use that commercial dealer as a resource. They're in that business for a reason, and they have experts that know a lot about what's going on and can help you figure out what's best for your use case and to find the right tool, even if that tool is a vehicle, that's an upfit vehicle, to help find that right tool. And then I think secondarily is there's a lot of other resources. Be sure to seek some of those out from either from Escalent, from local associations, whatever the case might be. And it's tough, right? If you're a small plumbing business, you probably really have your hands full trying to run that business and might be saying, I don't have a lot of time to go research everything else. Certainly understand and agree, but you'll probably be surprised as you start to get involved in even a handful of those associations, contacts, etc. You're going to encounter some people that know an awful lot and can probably share some good insights with you, and vice versa. And in my experience in the commercial space, that's really what it's all about. It's that collaboration, co-opetition. I think, as you said, Lucas, reciprocity, whatever term we use, it kind of all goes into the commercial space is a relationship business, and the more we can all do for each other, from insights to practical, hey, here's knowledge from a use case perspective, helps us all win. And I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. And that's where I love that theme of reciprocity and the Commercial Vehicle Business Summit coming up here, because, you don't need to do it alone. It's that collaboration that you mentioned. There's this unmistakable element of humanity and relationships in this sector that, frankly, you don't see in a lot of other areas. So, the change is so constant, but that humanity in the business is really always been front and center in this area. So, I mean, it's whether it's participating in associations, checking out the trade shows and conferences and things. I mean, it's just fantastic resources. NTEA, NAFA, AFLA, Work Truck Week, the ACT Expo, Fleet Forward Conference. I mean, all of these aspects are really built with the means to share information and really move the industry forward. So that's where, again, it's really important to always be curious and have an open mind about the evolving perceptions and realities of what's happening in the market. At Escalent, we're facilitating these connection points day in, day out in the work that we do. We're regularly talking with stakeholders throughout the sector about what's happening in their business, not only to develop our own point of view as an independent research and advisory company, but also to help others to help themselves, right? Because with always on secondary research and data modeling, we help product manufacturers and service providers keep the pulse of and deeply understand the reality of the markets that they operate in. And additionally, the extensive primary research we do among decision makers in businesses operating vehicles both help and inform those professionals about forward-looking topics, but also the product manufacturers and service providers about the attitudes and opinions of these folks, the organization of the business, the fleet composition, and orientation around potential products and services in the future. So going back to those earlier recommendations we discussed, Escalent is uniquely able to guide manufacturers and service providers planning and strategy. Our competitive landscape solution thoroughly maps the desired competitive set, specifications, configurations, go-to-market plans around products and services of interest. Our targeted monitoring newsletter puts together a weekly emailer of customized news feed focused on the topics of most interest, such as the evolving regulatory picture. And in terms of framing the customer journey and vehicle use cases, needs, and pain points, we can look to our commercial vehicle truck insights data solution, powered by data from Work Truck Solutions and Convoy, or alternatively, we can ask questions among our proprietary Fleet Advisory Hub audience, a collective of nearly 12,000 fleet decision makers representing over 1 million vehicles in operation. They're all deeply profiled, and they regularly help us to tell the story of tomorrow's fleet in a new way today.
Yeah, so talking about future of the commercial vehicle industry. So we talked about electrification being, it's happened to a degree, but it hasn't met with the expectations that people assumed 2 or 3 years ago. So we haven't seen this uptake. And it's going to be a hard sell to get battery electric into a lot of the applications that we talked about. However, are there alternatives? Yes, there are. The latest EPA regulations actually threw like a softball out to the industry in terms of not mandating any particular type of emission regulation going forward. You have to meet emissions, but now the options are perhaps more generous than they were before. So not specifically zero emission, but you need to reduce emissions. So we see, at least in the short to mid-term, hybrid becoming a real choice for this segment of the industry. It's packageable, and it gives you a degree of electrification that is useful in some service applications. We just had the horrendous Helene go through the southeast, and you think about these areas without power. Well, an electrified vehicle does bring the ability to have power. And so you think about some of these applications that would be really useful in a disaster situation like that. So electric vehicles and maybe hybrid vehicles have a temporary source of power that can be very useful in this type of application. So I think in the future, this could be something that people consider. We haven't in the past, but I think in the future, this is something that people will look to as a benefit. Also, in terms of future development, we have to talk about connectivity. So we're all connected. We all have cell phones. But when you talk about a commercial vehicle, it's often providing a service. It may just be a phone call, but it can often be data download. So vehicles are now more connected than they've ever been, and they will continue to be so. So if you look at what Ford is trying to do with their Ford Pro, is really trying to connect these vehicles so the fleet really understands how these vehicles are being used, what the cost is of these vehicles, and therefore where you can make alterations to perhaps reduce your overall cost. So data is going to be a friend to the commercial vehicle industry in terms of improving our productivity. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all in business for, to improve productivity. So I think that's a real benefit. In terms of future development, we see the upfitter industry becoming more concentrated. They will focus on more and more aspects that can reduce the service times for vehicles. So if you can make the vehicle overall more efficient, then this will be a benefit. So I think the upfitter industry has a huge part to play in improving productivity by the outfits they provide into the commercial vehicle industry.
I would 100% agree with that. Well, I won't take any more of your time today, but thanks so much for spending, 25, 30 minutes with us. It's been very insightful. I think I need to go digest some of this now, try and figure out what to take away from that. But I sure appreciate all of your expertise. Again, thanks for joining us today.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right, let me stop the recording here.